All right. Well, welcome. We are very, very happy that you've joined us today for our final webinar in our webinar series that is focused on adopting materials through an equity-focused lens. Today, we'll focus specifically on stakeholder engagement, and we'll hear from some wonderful guests about the work they did before beginning their adoption process, and then during and then after also their selection. So excited for you to hear from our guests today, and hopefully we can learn from one another. Real quick housekeeping. This webinar will be recorded. You can see the recording red dot in the corner. We will make that available in a follow-up email. It will also be available on our YouTube channel. We will have a question and answer session at the end, but feel free to use the Q&A feature to submit questions throughout. We'll try to get those answered either by our EdReport staff or by the presenters themselves if we can get them to answer live. But we'll try to answer every single question before you leave today. Any unanswered questions will follow up in an email or some other form of communication. If you do need closed captioning services, please click the live transcript button in the toolbar so that you can follow along. Please do tag us at EdReports and use the hashtag Materials Matter on Twitter, and we'll make sure to follow you and engage in all kinds of fun social media conversations. I am Shanna Estep. I am the Senior Outreach Specialist here at EdReports, and I have had the pleasure of working closely with our guests today on their particular adoption process, and can't wait for you all to hear what they've learned. A quick introduction to our facilitator for today. Jessica Faith Carter is our field services specialist. She'll be facilitating the discussion and the conversation with our two guests today, Janice Lane, who is the Executive Director of Teaching and Learning for Baltimore City Public Schools. I've known Janice now for the last few years, and it's been such a pleasure. She is incredibly passionate about literacy, and in 2012, Janice became the City Schools Director for Literacy, and since 2015, she's served as the Executive Director of Teaching and Learning. So welcome, Janice. Can't wait to hear about all the learning you've been doing. Our other guest is Samantha Ashby. Samantha is a teacher in Baltimore City Schools. She's an early childhood educator for the last 8 years. She also, in addition to being a classroom teacher, wears other hats. She's held the role of academic planning facilitator as well, and which supports teachers in grades kindergarten through 8th by providing school-based professional learning. The two of them played a role in the adoption of their literacy materials, and were part of our case study, and I can't wait for you to hear more from them. Jessica Faith, you want to take it over?
Sure thing. Thank you so much for that introduction, Shanna, and I'm just looking forward to getting into our presentation for today. So our agenda, we're going to just start off with just an overview on instructional materials as a lever for equity, and then we'll move into a brief overview of stakeholder engagement during the adoption process, and really close out with just stakeholder engagement and equity before we move into our Q&A with our amazing panelists for today. So when we think about materials as, as a lever for equity, we see that adoption and the use of high quality instructional materials can really ensure that every student is learning grade level, engaging, and meaningful content. And with the use of high quality instructional materials, research has found that it can decrease inequities in instruction between and within schools. And so when schools and districts and teachers are using materials that are high quality, we can see that there are improvements in student success. And so when we think about equity in the adoption process, there are a couple of ways that you can look at adopting materials through an equity-focused lens. And so some of the ways to view this is centering the needs of students who have been least well served in your system, having a strong vision for instruction for every student, Focusing on local priorities that will reflect the needs and context of your students, and including the voices and perspectives from a broad range of stakeholders that includes students, families, teachers, and leaders in a district to have the most equitable adoption process. And so here at Ed Reports, our mission statement is that we are a nonprofit organization that increases the capacity of teachers, administrators, and leaders to seek, identify, and demand the highest quality instructional materials. And drawing upon expert educators, our reviews of instructional materials and support of smart adoption processes equip teachers with excellent materials nationwide. So we are really deep in this work of materials, but then also thinking about it from an equity perspective of today's webinar. And this ties into, our theory of action where, we believe that reliable information against quality criteria in a quickly changing marketplace does help educators make informed purchasing decisions and improve student learning. So we are not making recommendations or, telling you what to do, but we are sharing the voices of educators just like you who are empowering you to make great decisions for your classrooms, your schools, and your districts. And again, the connection here to stakeholder engagement is really the fact that what we do with our reviews and with our supports or reports are really tied to the voices and the perspectives of educators from a range of backgrounds and perspectives. And so when we think why stakeholder engagement, so this is a topic that has been around for years. It's something that districts do, states do, campuses do at varying levels. But why is it important? And so one of the main things about stakeholder engagement is that it allows, districts, states, stakeholders, teachers, students to kind of foster those connections and relationships that they can build from the engagement process. This also, when you use stakeholder engagement effectively, provides insights into the needs and wants of the communities. And so when districts are able to, effectively engage stakeholders in their communities, they're able to find out like what do they need, what do they want, what is it that the district can do to provide stakeholders with what they need. Stakeholder engagement also increases buy-in when decisions are made. And so, again, engaging various individuals on the front end of the decision-making process oftentimes leads to better buy-in and increased engagement when the decisions are actually made. And so you're not having to deal with some of the unintended consequences of people maybe not being aware or not feeling like their views and their opinions and their needs were valued. And ultimately, it can lead to improved outcomes. And so when, stakeholders are engaged, when parents and teachers and students have a voice in the processes, it's a lot of an impact that can be had to help with student outcomes. And so when we think about who are the stakeholders in this process, there's a range. I mean, of course, we think of the educators, like your teachers, your campus administrators, your district leaders, but it can go beyond that, including parents as stakeholders and grandparents and caregivers who are sending their children to schools every day in the hopes that they're receiving a high quality education. Students can also be considered stakeholders, and they are stakeholders in a lot of different ways, because at the end of the day, the decisions that are made at the district level for them will impact their futures. And so they can have a voice and should have a voice in making decisions. And then finally, community members. And so this can be a range of people, including, business owners, policy leaders, people just with a vested interest in the future of the district and the success of students. And this is not an exhaustive list. There are definitely other people and stakeholders that can be involved, but this is kind of at a high level where to start. Oh no, where did it go? Sorry. So when we think about the adoption process, of course, there are, in our adoption process at Ed Reports, there are our 6 steps. And so definitely beginning with establishing your process, developing your lens, knowing and winnowing your choices, investigating materials, deciding and launch, and then implementing the materials. And what's unique about the stakeholder engagement element of all of this is that it is present throughout the adoption process. And so there, are ways to engage stakeholders and bring them in and have them have a part in the process throughout. But for sake of today's discussion, we're going to focus on a couple of different areas and not all of them. So the first area we're going to look at is just establishing your process. And so in the beginning of an adoption process, you can engage stakeholders by assembling a diverse adoption committee. And so similar to what I said earlier, the stakeholders that can be involved in any process or anything that a district is working on can consist of teachers, content leaders, content experts, district curriculum leaders, as well as other stakeholders that would have the ability to speak to the needs of students as it relates to materials. And then the other piece of engaging stakeholders in this process is really to provide the committee with a clear charge. And so what this means is really being clear about the responsibilities that it takes in order for stakeholders to be involved in this work, because it is and can be a lift, and it does take a lot, but then also the commitment and really highlighting the importance of the work that stakeholders will do and the benefits that will come from having a very intentional approach to being involved in the adoption work. So the next area is really investigating the materials. And so this also has a strong connection to stakeholder engagement, because this is where, you can think about field testing with stakeholders, especially teachers. And so this is a really good way to engage educators to ensure that, if there are materials that are coming up as ones that maybe you are considering using, that the teachers and the people who are going to, ultimately be using it have a chance to weigh in on, what's going to work or how it will be in the classroom. One thing that's important to think about in this phase of the adoption process is also being mindful of the lift on teachers and educators who may be supporting with the investigation of materials, because it does take time, and it does take consideration of just the work that goes into evaluating and investigating materials. And then finally, establishing a clear purpose and set of goals for investigating the materials. So this is an area where, when educators are engaged at this stage of the adoption process, they are able to provide, useful information and feedback about, what students will be able to gain from these materials, as well as the impact that it's going to have on teachers. But it's also really important to make sure that, the way feedback's being given and the way that stakeholders are being asked to weigh in is intentional and purposeful, so that it's clear and aligned to the ultimate outcomes that you're hoping to see. And so finally, when we think about the engaging stakeholders throughout the process, in this last part where we're implementing materials, we can see that there are a couple of ways that stakeholder engagement can play out. So the first is just to remember to develop and execute a plan. When districts are looking to, work with stakeholders, having a plan for implementation can definitely be something that makes it smoother. You may have, engaged stakeholders throughout the process as far as thinking through, different ways to establish the process, to investigate the materials, and have them weigh in. But the implementation piece is really where the work is really, really happening, because now you have the materials and you want to make sure that they're being implemented. And so one thing to consider in this area is potentially adding new stakeholders. And so you may have worked with the same group throughout the adoption process, but once you reach this final stage, sometimes it's beneficial to have a new set of eyes or a different set of people that can advise and weigh in on the process for rolling things out. Another thing to consider from the stakeholder engagement perspective during implementation is just thinking about the long-term and short-term goals that may be necessary to get things rolling out smoothly. And then finally, just reflecting on the needs of each stakeholder group. And so sometimes there may be, different needs for teachers, for campus leaders, for parents and families, as it relates to how materials are being rolled out and how they ultimately make sure that they are in classrooms. And so just thinking about, what this is going to take, and some steps that may help with this include, going out into the schools and the community to talk to people to find out what they need. Also making sure that stakeholders see how feedback has been incorporated throughout the process, and then also tailoring professional learning for educators to make sure that you've identified the needs and addressed them so that everything can be rolled out pretty smoothly. And so when we think about stakeholder engagement and just its impact on equity, really as a benefit of using stakeholder engagement, districts can find that it allows them to leverage existing expertise within districts and campuses and schools. There are teachers, there are school leaders, there are other educators who have skill sets, have experience that can be brought to the table to inform the adoption process. And so that's one of the key benefits. When we also think about the aspect of inclusivity, when stakeholder engagement is a key part of the adoption process, it models inclusivity because it shows stakeholders that people are welcome at the table, people are welcome to share their experience and their perspectives to inform a major decision that's going to impact students and impact the community as a whole for years to come. Stakeholder engagement also allows districts to demonstrate transparency because it shows that throughout the process, when different people are engaged and working throughout the adoption process, they're aware of what's going on, and there are those feedback loops that allow people to really see the inside and inner workings of the process. And then it also builds trust. And so when people are able to see that the adoption process is one where many people, many voices, many perspectives are included and represented, it builds that additional layer of trust that allows for greater works to be done within a district and within a community. And so before we go into our panel, I just wanted to highlight just some of the things that Baltimore City Public Schools did very well with their materials adoption and stakeholder engagement. So in 2018, Baltimore City Public Schools began the adoption process to select an ELA program that would meet the needs of their 54,000 students and their teachers. And so through some intentional stakeholder engagement, the district was able to transform its approach to adopting instructional materials with overwhelmingly positive results. And so as we see, like before, in kind of mirroring kind of some of the things that I just talked about, before the process, they did a curriculum audit and a teacher survey. They included a range of educators on their committee, which they'll talk a little bit about later. And then also allowed for public feedback sessions to inform the process. During their adoption process, they had stakeholder meetings for various groups and focus groups as well. They also did some digital engagement to get feedback in different mediums. There's this really cool student-led Facebook Live session on the adoption process. And then there was also community sessions to interact with the materials. And then finally, after the adoption process, there was, outreach to teachers for professional learning. And so really taking the time to get to know like what it is that teachers would really need in that professional learning. There was a lot of training on the materials in order to be able to roll them out. And then they also shared the final decisions with the community and allowed for opportunities for the community to share feedback in a loop. So today we have two Baltimore City Public Schools educators with us to share more about their experiences engaging stakeholders before, during, and after materials adoption process. So we will turn it over now to our questions. So let me unshare my screen so we can see everyone. And there we go. I think we can all see each other now. Great. All right. So Samantha, Janice, you ready? All right. So first question, what guided your district's decision around stakeholder engagement as you were establishing your adoption process?
Great. Well, first, thanks for having us here. We'll go back and forth between Sam and I, so definitely share from 2 points of view. I am the executive director of teaching and learning, so was part of the development of the process, and Sam was a lead teacher throughout the process with us. So I think it'll also be helpful to look at the various aspects of how that comes together. One of the things that was really important for us was changing the way the district was enacting decisions. Many times teachers feel that the folks at central office are the ones who make the decision. And so what we wanted to do was really have an opportunity to allow the experts from the field, so our teachers, our principals, our school leaders, et cetera, help inform our process. And in doing that, we wanted to be really transparent, to open this to the community, to open it to our school-based folks, but to also be thoughtful around the why behind that. So making sure that we were sharing information, setting that piece up. It was also a time, as you mentioned earlier, we had done a curriculum audit, and we were really starting to think about our outcomes hadn't changed year over year. I was previously the director of literacy, and you could pretty much say our DIBEL scores middle of the year are going to look like this. So we knew that there was a change that needed to happen. So we really started thinking about how do we build the storyline, the engagement, the ownership from the very start of the decision in that process.
Awesome. Thank you. And just a follow up to that. So can you talk a little bit more about just the efforts your team undertook to really ensure that it was a diverse group of stakeholders involved early in the process?
Sure. So in the very beginning, one of the first things we did was started communicating the results of what we were finding in the curriculum audit. So one, we let people know we were doing that. And those people included the community at large. So we shared information at our board meetings. We held public forums. We held informational sessions to really talk about, one, what was the current status? And two, what did we want moving forward with our students? So we used a lot of current research, best practices to really help inform the field at the same time. And in doing that, we didn't just target, again, reaching and talking to teachers. We talked to our teachers, our school leaders, and took it outside into the community. And what we wanted to make sure was that as we were doing this work, one, that people were informed through a transparent and clear process all the way from the start of the decision to think about adoption all the way through implementation and after, as you highlighted. And in doing that, when we started thinking about things like the instructional vision, what were we hearing from those different stakeholder groups as a need, whether that was a parent saying, I don't see this and I want this for my students, or whether it was teachers who were telling us, right now, in elementary school, we've got this curriculum for writing, we've got this for word study, we've got this for reading, and how do I bring it all together? And really taking the opportunity to name what we were hearing and then share that back out with folks. So it wasn't a secret in any kind of process that we were doing this, and being intentional, as you started talking about the other pieces that I think we'll highlight a little later, but establishing the work team. Who's going to investigate these materials, knowing that we don't want a team of individuals that is all central office, but really, where are our teachers on that? Where are our principals in that? And I think it was just an interesting process from the start, because when we asked our principals and our teachers, we had two teachers, two principals on our group. One of the principals was very seasoned in the district and has been there, and they were like, we've never done this before, right? This level of engagement and learning and depth. So I think that was also something that allowed us the opportunity. And really, quite frankly, what happened is the more we started sharing, the more interest it drew. So it was really a way to get to that inclusiveness of the process, was because more and more people wanted to know. So we had, our parent groups that were asking us to come and share the information. We had the board that was asking those questions. So it really became a main topic of discussion for the Baltimore community as a whole.
Awesome. So can you talk a little bit about the process that you took for leading teachers through the audit process prior to your adoption?
Sure. I'll hit a few, and then Sam, I'll let you kick into that as well. So it's not just all me sharing, right? This idea of making sure that the teachers in the adoption process and that were with us heard those same through lines we were hearing. So we had gone out to the community. We held a number of meetings where anyone was welcome. Again, to your earlier slides that you shared, parents were welcome. In the beginning, when we started this adoption, we were actually looking for K-5 materials. So we didn't target our students as deeply because they were little people. But in different iterations, you know, we've now been bringing student voice to the table. But had our parents, our community, our partners, and our teachers and our school leaders really hearing what folks said. So saying, this is what we want in a curriculum, this is what we don't see. These are our goals. These are our hopes and our dreams for students when they exit city schools in a graduated way. So in us bringing that together, we kept some really great information in front of that review committee. So as I said, we had some central office staff that had literacy expertise, some that had differentiated learning. So they were able to bring forward the voice of ELs, of our special education students in that work. And then we had teachers that would be impacted in this decision, as well as principals in that. And what we knew about bringing them together was, one, Baltimore has amazing, amazing teachers and school leaders. So we knew we'd have the top crop with us in this decision making, but we wanted to make sure they were informed in the process and in what folks were saying before we ever unzipped materials and said, here's our options. So we spent quite a bit of time together. One, you said it earlier, but it's big, committing to the process, right? We went to Sam and said, we want you to be part of the process, but this is what it means, right? It doesn't mean you can drop in when you want. It means you're committing to these hours and this is what it looks like. And in doing that, we brought experts to the table. So we brought folks like David Lieben, Nell Duke, to really talk to folks about what current research says, what we want the work to look like. So we had this body of work of best research, best current practice sitting with the group. We had charts and charts around the room, as well as synthesis of what we heard from the community. So that was a center part of every conversation that we had together. And then, quite frankly, we partnered with Ed Reports to help us understand how the materials were reviewed. One of the things that was really valuable in that process was understanding how you utilize teachers as a major decision point for that. So instead of us trying to recreate the wheel, we partnered with Ed Reports to think about, what do we already know? There was no point in us reviewing materials that weren't green lighted, because we knew the process and the depth that you all had done was a starting point for us to build on. So really started thinking about how to couple those processes together. And as I said, most importantly, grounding, you know, we were a district of continuous improvement. So really grounding the user aspect of the work. What are we hearing from teachers? What do our teachers want and need? You also said the lift for teachers. So what do they want in this process and how can they move that forward?
Awesome. Thank you. So speaking of teachers, now I have some questions for Samantha. The first just being, as a teacher, how did you feel about being part of the adoption committee in the early stages of the process?
Oh my goodness. I felt like an immense amount of kind of empowering pressure, right? So that's the best way that I can put it, because I was being asked to help choose a curriculum to meet the needs of, like you said, Jessica, Faith, 54,000 students. So that was daunting. Prior to the initial meeting, I thought, oh my goodness, I'm going to have to read every study I can put my hands on to really educate myself on how to pick a curriculum. I don't know if anyone has ever tried to like blindly read the internet, but as you can imagine, the results weren't really that fruitful at the time. And I couldn't find much research information, you know, regarding my query, which was really as simple as how to pick a good curriculum. And this is prior to my initial meeting with Janice and the team. So I didn't want to go into the meeting, you know, not knowing something. I knew that I had to pick something that was, I know that I wanted it to be standards-based. I knew that all of the students' needs needed to be met and all of those kinds of things. But outside of that, I was pretty nervous about what to expect in picking a high-quality curriculum. And to my surprise, they did already have a process in place. Like Janice mentioned, all of the materials that we looked at were already pre-vetted by Ed Reports. And we just had some other things in our rubric that we wanted to look for, like making sure that the materials were representative of our community, that they were multicultural, students were able to see themselves and their peers in the text while learning, and among other things. So that is how I would describe the general feeling of being a part of the process.
Cool. And so follow up here, can you talk a little bit just about your experience kind of serving as that connection between the teachers and then the district leaders? Because as a teacher, you were in a pretty unique position to be on this committee. So can you just talk a little bit about what that experience was like, kind of navigating both sides?
Sure. So I got to represent for the home team. I got to represent for the fields. I came into teaching through Baltimore City Teaching Residency, which is a branch of TNTP Teaching Fellows. And we spoke extensively about the achievement gap, right? And how our purpose was to close the gaps that exist between our minority students in underserved communities and their more affluent peers. So this was the lens through which I taught every year. So the teachers on the team shared the same sentiment. And although we hadn't met prior to the process, we still shared in the energy that we put into our students to ensure that they receive the best education daily. And I can imagine and I know in working with my peers throughout the district that they felt the same way. So it was nice to be a part of a representative community. Yes, I was early childhood, but they were middle school and intermediate teachers on the team as well that could share in our thoughts. Although we came from different grade bands, schools, and parts of the city entirely, we still had the similar purpose. It was nice to be surrounded by educators that had the same goals in mind. We didn't look at our students through a lens of lack. We saw the value and ability in them every day, and we wanted to ensure that the district selection of instructional materials mirrored the high expectations that we put and set forth for our students every single day. So it was a great experience to be a part of, knowing that our students would have an ELA curriculum that they deserved, and that was also equally deserving of them because we really felt like they were worth it. So it was awesome.
Awesome, thank you. I'm glad you found it to be an awesome experience. So next question, just tossing it out for either one of you. As we think about investigating the materials, as your process went on, after, you kind of established the process, got the adoption committee together, how did you adjust your initial approach to stakeholder engagement? So what did you learn from having to kind of, make adjustments and shifts throughout the process?
I can start. I think, as Samantha just framed, it was a huge responsibility for 2 teachers, 2 principals, along with the rest of the team to really inform. And part of our goal was to take the initial findings of our top 2 curriculum out to get feedback. And I think it's always amazing to talk about the great things that happen, but I also want to be transparent that this is hard work, right? This was to switch the shift in the district of the district being the decision maker, or that the district is now listening to the experts. That sounds cute. But after years and years of teachers haven't felt that, they don't trust that process so much, right? Samantha can give me the head nod on the side, right? But it was a lot of that conversation that when we first went out, or when we asked for surveys and people responded back, upwards of 700 and some teachers, and you might hear from 79 teachers. And when we started digging a little deeper and started asking questions about why aren't we hearing from you, they were like, you know what you're doing. You're not going to listen to us. So there was a lot of that mindset work that we had to really double down on to think about, how do you not only ask for the voice, but how do you share transparently what you're hearing and then honor that voice. So I think for us, one of the things that we did was readjust the number of ways we tried to get feedback. In Baltimore, we always like to go hard and fast. So we had a tight timeline. And what we did was we adjusted how we were going to garner feedback from folks. So originally we had done some surveys. We went out into professional development and got, creative and had feedback cafes where if a teacher stopped, they got a cup of coffee and a donut. Bribery can sometimes be a good thing, and just tried to get as many ways as we could hear that voice. But at the same time we were hearing it, we were then publishing what we heard. And whether that publishing was, an email blast out to all the ELA teachers, or whether it was that Facebook Live session that you mentioned, it was back before virtual was cool for everybody, or the way that we did everything every single day. And the CAO and I had a very informal chat that was student led about why in the world do instructional materials matter. And it was amazing from the student point of view, because they were asking the questions like, well, what does this mean for me? I'm a high school freshman. What does this mean for, elementary adoption in the district? And so they really pushed us, but they created this forum in this space where we could continue to have that conversation that was really raw. It was really real. Or the parents who would email in to basically say, our scores haven't been great. What's this going to do to change that? Why should we trust this process? And so it allowed us to continue, at one point after we got to those top 2 selections, we did surveys, we did those feedback cafes, but then we also did what we said, take the road on the show, or the show on the road. We put all those materials in the car and we drove them to 4 different spots in the city, after school hours, so teachers could come, on Saturdays so parents could come. And it still wasn't enough. We didn't have half of our teachers giving us the feedback. So we then went back one more time and worked with those top 2 vendors and said, we want to create a digital source so that parents and community members and students at that point could log in and look at the top 2 options, get a walkthrough of those materials, understand the instructional design, see where it connected to what we had heard, and then leave feedback there. So as we continue to update the board around this, as we continue to go out and talk to those parent groups, community groups, teachers, et cetera, we were capturing that information, codifying our learning, and really, really, really communicating that clearly.
Sounds like you all did a lot there too. So kind of as another follow-up to this question, you kind of touched on it a little bit, but maybe can you talk a little bit more about some of the maybe more damaging practices that break trust between leadership and teachers in adopting high quality instructional materials? And again, I think, you kind of touched on this, but what are some ways that, district leaders can avoid some of those practices that kind of break down the trust? And again, I think Samantha also weigh in here from the teacher side as well.
Yeah, I can definitely do that. So I think that prior to this process, like Janice mentioned, there wasn't any, right? So it had already been damaged. So now we were in a part of repairing that damage. So I actually think that the audit in itself was on the mend of that damage, right? So, but it was hard to believe. Like, even when I was asked, I was like, "Are they serious? This is a curriculum audit. They want to know what I think." It was unprecedented for the district to inquire about what we thought at that point. So, I think if you're thinking about damaging practices, I think you have to think about the culture of your district and changing the mindset of your teachers and how they relate to the district. Making it seem as if there's a 2-door policy, not just a top down, do what I say, and that's how we felt. So I think after this process, they started having more engagement for teachers, opportunities. They ask our opinion often throughout the year on various topics now, where that wasn't the case before. Even in something as small as professional development, and having a survey at the end of professional development that I or other teachers in the district facilitate, or ACLs in the district facilitate, makes us feel that our voices are being heard. You'll hear teachers in professional development like, "Oh, I do not like this. Let me put that in the survey." And they knew after a few years that after that trust was built, that someone's going to get back to them, or that, hey, this was echoed in this survey. We had citywide meetings for principals and admin and other admin in the building where this data was kind of presented. These are what your teachers are saying. These are what our teachers are saying. This is how they are feeling. This is what they think that they need that we are not providing. And just being transparent in the process of understanding us. So I think that the curriculum audit did more than just pick a curriculum. It just opened the door to that two-way communication, like I mentioned, which made us feel more empowered to feel safe, I guess, also to feel safe in voicing our opinion without, fear of what's going to happen next.
And if I can add, I think that really captures so much about the culture shift and the hard work that took, like Samantha said, the empowerment that Samantha, her colleagues, our principals took on as liaisons in this work, right? It wasn't just the Office of Teaching and Learning wants this. It was informed by research. It was process driven. It was openly communicated. I think one of those easy pitfalls to fall into, and this goes so much into the work of equity, is ways that we examine whiteness in our work, quite frankly, right? A lot of times everything is urgent and everything is on fire and a decision has to be made in 3 minutes. So really putting guardrails around the process to adhere to what we said we were going to do and not make this a compliance exercise. It's very easy to go out and do a survey and say, we heard from 1,000 teachers, or we did this and this is what happened from that, versus really putting your ear to the ground and allowing people to bring their voice forward, and then allowing the district to be responsive to that. And being transparent, again, I just keep saying that word today, but being transparent in how you communicate that back out so that people feel genuinely that they are heard, but not only they're heard, that they are truly impacting the decision, the process, and what happens. And Sam's point around PD, you know, we spent so much time early on in the PD sitting side by side with teachers, listening to what the response was, working with our partners to establish, okay, this might be the way you do PD. That's not the way you do it in Baltimore, right? We also like, I said it earlier, we go hard and fast, but we also like to Baltimoreize everything we do. It needs to fit us, and you need to fit our vision and our work. So I think the other things that were really clear, Jessica, Faith, you it's Thursday. I'm using words like hit it. You hit it earlier in your slides, but you know, another pitfall is not having an instructional vision that's clear and articulated to people, because they don't know what to wrap around if you don't have that. So bringing in the stakeholder voice, having that instructional vision, and quite frankly, having an informed plan to get you there so that folks do know, what are you going to do once we adopt? You know, knowing, and I think Sam's point was also something huge, right? This isn't a decision where you're like, oh, we're going to adopt curriculum this year, and if it doesn't work out, no big deal, we'll choose another one next year. This is a major investment. And so we know not only is it something that we want to truly impact the culture, the climate, the cultural relevance in the district, it's something that needs to have long-standing impact for our students, for our community, for our family. So when you talk about equity, and what does that mean? That pretty much sums up everything we're trying to do. It's that listening, it's that communication, it's the, after we made the decision, still helping people get through that. So I think for us, one of the things I would say is mostly you can't approach this as a compliance piece. And it's hard when you get into work, because you're not only thinking about timelines, you're also thinking about the compliance side of, I've got to get to the board, I've got to get to this. So really making sure that systems are nimble enough and open enough to learn with that.
Absolutely. And so just a question here that came up. We'd love to hear just one, what you all ended up adopting. And then also if you could talk, either of you could talk a little bit about, you know, the process of just working with the publisher as part of the decision process, and then also into implementation.
Sure. So I'll start, Sam, jump in. You know, I think what is great that was not great years ago, I've been in this work for a long time, is that there weren't high quality choices for us, right? Now there are. And so there are so many green lighted materials. And I think this goes back to the earlier conversation about match and your instructional vision. So because we had all of those, I mean, the room was surrounded with posters of what do teachers want? What do principals want? What do families want? It was easy to go down and within our adoption process, create a rubric that named out those really important things, as well as things we know, like it needs to have, you know, rich experiences in it. It needs to have assessment. It needs to have the non-negotiables, as we would call them, for curriculum. And so in doing that, we were able to identify 2 high quality curriculum materials for us. And it was really about the match for Baltimore. So for us, we chose Great Minds product, Wit and Wisdom. And it was quite interesting because of the feedback we had done. We, as I said earlier, we're going to adopt K-5. But when we took it out to principals and to our teachers, they were like, wait a minute, Baltimore still has a number of K-8 schools in existence. So the principals were like, I love the instructional routines that start in kindergarten and are built upon grade after grade. Why can't we go to grade 8? And so actually what wound up happening with us in the adoption is we adopted Wit and Wisdom grades K-8. We did not do a pilot in Baltimore. We went all in mainly because we had built so much engagement and ownership within and through the process that people were excited for it. So, that was part of what we did early on with that, and then continue to make sure that we garnered feedback, voice throughout the work. And it was really quite exciting because when we started, again, with the engagement piece deep in the beginning, we had most of our teachers were like, oh, now it was very different, right? As I said, our curriculum before that was homegrown. So we had a little bit of writing in this box, a little bit of, reading in this box, and phonics and phonemic awareness in another box. So people were willing to take the journey with us around that professional development. Once we knew, even in the adoption process, when we got to those top 2 people, or those top 2 partners and vendors, we were very clear around what we wanted. We need you to develop a digital, resource kit where teachers and parents and students can see this. This is what it looks like. Here's Baltimore's vision. A lot of that is identified in your RFP process, but making that again transparent. And then when we finally got the green light, which I think was like the first week in June from the school board that the materials were approved, we were connected at the hip with Great Minds. And we sat with them. We had them share with us their professional development. They were partners in the work from the first day that, they were open to say, this is what we did. And we were like, yeah, but we want it this way. So we were able to work together to really, again, go back to that instructional vision, hear from folks. They were willing and open with us to have teachers in that discussion, so that when, at the end of every professional development session, we went down side by side and read through every single comment and said, what do we see? What do we hear? And then we talked about both those short and long-term goals that we discussed. How do you set it up so that when you are implementing, what happens besides those, sit and get kinds of PDs, but what happens in the field with teachers? And so we started right away with a deep strategy for implementation as well as initial onboarding, because you want to make sure another pitfall to avoid is that teachers have that time to sit and understand the instructional design of the curriculum, the what and why. So some of that summer work that allows teachers to process, get ready, wrap their hands around the materials, spend their own time making sense, and then building in that deep professional development. And so I would say as a district, that instructional vision piece is critical in the work moving forward with partners, because just like, Ed Reports has set up this work that is foundational, there's also groups like Rivet and other folks that are setting up what is critical about a professional development piece. And what's beautiful in the work is neither one can be done in compliance, and they fit in and around each other. So I think that was critical work for us.
Also, in thinking about Great Minds and how they've supported us, I had the unique opportunity we were a spotlight school with Great Minds, and they were in our school. So they came to our school and they would do observations with us. Like I mentioned, I am the academic planning facilitator, so I'd work closely with them. We'd set up observation schedules. They'd visit classrooms, give me feedback on things that I can coach teachers on in the building. That is directly aligned to the expectations of the curriculum, making sure that our teachers were using the materials at its optimal level. So that was very cool. And even I think one of the people that came, she actually helped write the 5th grade curriculum. So our 5th grade teachers were like, oh my goodness, it was like almost seeing Beyonce or something. Like, you can help me with this, and asking a question and having my questions and concerns answered by someone who not only is here to support, but had a hand in writing this thing. So Great Minds materials having written by teacher writers was a big deal. They also, in professional development, were open to hearing and troubleshooting our concerns. So every time we had a meeting and they were monthly, I was able to say, hey, I'm kind of struggling with coaching teachers around understanding the knowledge build as opposed to the skills build, as to use a specific example. And they would say, this is the research, here it is, explain it to me. And then I was able to understand the research and really give research-based professional learning to my peers, because I was still teaching at the time. So I wanted to know too. So why are we making this shift from, this is my main idea book, I'm going to teach main idea with this beautiful book right here, instead of, and building towards, no, we are building your knowledge around content, and the skills will come through that content. And that was a mindset shift for everybody. That was even if I was creating standards-based instruction through the materials I had, it wasn't deep. It was broad, but it wasn't deep. And so with wisdom, I think the shift was, well, Great Minds materials, we were able to dig deeper, and we were really able to use it as a framework for teaching the standards in a meaningful way to our students. Also, I would say they were open to having us on board. I actually am a Great Minds Fellow now, so I get to deliver PD across the country to other districts that were willing to adopt Great Minds as well. And I think that hearing all of their concerns and knowing that we had the same ones was also, it's a safe space. So I can honestly say that the professional development that led from the ones that the district offered to the spotlight schools that were created throughout the district as well. I don't know who else was a spotlight school, but we were lucky to be one, and this is prior to me being a fellow. And then once I found out about their professional development model and how interactive it was, I was sold because I wanted to know. I need to know everything now, because it had opened my eyes to a world of research that not a lot of teachers, as teachers, we're not really privy to. We're just kind of like, do this, okay, we're gonna do it, but we're gonna make it the best we can. And it's not always, unfortunately, steeped in research and the most current and compelling research. It's steeped in what we think is best, and it comes from a positive place, but it's not always the best practice. So it was nice to be aligned with something that had best practice embedded into it.
I think another piece to add on that really important piece that Sam just hit around research is also making sure that teachers have the time and space for the learning that she just mentioned as a small nugget, but is such a part of her own learning, one, and then the learning to support the teachers that she works with. So being able to take that information, process that, and really embrace that while she's doing the 911 other things that a teacher does in the day. So making sure that we created that space and the time in schools that teachers had for planning, that they understood that they needed to be able to study the materials. But we also had a message from our CEO down and our teachers up that we were all in learning mode. This was brand new for us. This was new curriculum. No one had taught a knowledge build curriculum that looked like this. And that the beauty of the curriculum in choosing Wit and Wisdom was that it deserved the deep study. So we needed to make sure that we created that space, and that we also, quite frankly, created guardrails around that, so that when somebody came in and did a learning walk and said, I want to go here, and it was like, no, we're back here. This is what we said we were going to do. This is what we need to do with teachers, and make sure that that happens for those teachers. And ensuring that our teachers really had ongoing deep learning, right? Adult learning is important in this work. So making sure that they got the time to embrace the materials. Again, going back to the earlier message, the understanding of the design of the materials, and then time to implement with feedback. So that as they were trying on something, whether it was feedback that something wasn't working and we as a district had to do professional development around that, or whether it was feedback that they could learn from one another, being able to elevate that learning from, within is really powerful, so that teachers have that voice has just been something that we've been able to really think about, and making sure that in that professional development, we're talking about each and every student, so that we're thinking about, what do our ELs need? What do our students with special needs or IEPs need? What do our gifted and advanced students need? Right? How do we make sure that when this equity design was delivered, or the intended outcomes of the curriculum, that's hard work. And that's hard work that districts need to own. Because one of the things we noticed right away was, our instructional framework and our rubric said make sure that kids know the objective of the lesson. And we had our teachers trained. Sam can tell you this from start to finish, that teachers would say the objective, then they'd ask 3 friends in the class to say the objective, then say the objective in your own words. And by the time you got done saying the objective, your lesson was over, right? So we had to break some of our own systems and being willing to stop and say, wait a minute, we've created our own confusion by setting this up. And again, the systems and structures being able to listen to, 1, what we saw, but 2, what we heard from the field, and being responsive to that is just incredibly insightful.
Absolutely. So we have one more question that I'd love to hear both of you just weigh in on. And the question is really simple. It's, what advice would you give to districts looking to undertake this work with an equity focus? So anything that you can just share, parting words of advice would be helpful.
Yeah, I mean, I think all of the pieces we've talked about, I think one of the most important is to be humble in the process, to really be open to your own learning. And that learning can come from experts like we talked to. It could come from support structures. We talked to other districts who had adopted. But it's that humbleness and openness that actually a teacher knows a lot more about what needs to happen in their classroom than I do, right? I know a lot because I've been in the work a long time, but I've never taught the Common Core standards. So for me to stand up and just say, Janice Lane thinks this because I've had X experience. And then I think that humbleness of also breaking down the systems that we have in play, right? That's the hardest part, I think, in the equity, one of the hardest parts in the equity work is dismantling the systems that have been in place. Because again, the urgency, the time, so really making sure that you push on that as a process. And then I would say the last lesson is listen to the amazing stakeholders around you. I knew Sam before the process. I respected Sam, but now I respect Sam on a whole different level of leadership because I've seen her lead beyond a teacher seat. So she brought that teacher expertise, but then she put on the lens of, okay, now you're not talking about my school and my zone. She took on the ownership of every K-8 student in Baltimore City. And so, being humble in the process that the smartest people are around us and making sure that we listen, that we share, and that we learn in this process, I think would be my nugget for today.
I think also I think if I were to share something for other districts is maybe open the floor to include more people on the team, just so that your team is representative of those that want to be a part of it. And that would probably be the only thing that I think we got some pushback on was, well, the team should have been a little bit bigger. But like I said, it was unprecedented. It was not perfect. And we tried our best. So I would probably say that.
And I would say have fun. We had a great time doing this work, learning it, doing it, partnering around it, empowering people. I just think that was also some great learning for us that has really informed work moving forward in city schools. As Sam said, we hadn't done it this way before. This is now part of the adoption process and everything that we adopt and move forward. So it's been fun.
Taking the time to educate the people on your panel, because we took a lot of time prior to even looking at the materials. Like I said, I Googled how to pick good curriculum because I didn't know what to expect. So I think educating the people on your panel about, well, what is high quality instructional material? And what does it look like? What are the variables that go into it? All of those kinds of things. So just taking the time to bring in those people that came to talk to us and reading a plethora. I mean, I probably didn't read that much since my degree, like since college, of all the materials that went into learning before I was able to sit in front of the materials and make an educated decision. So.
And as if you couldn't tell, Baltimore has a lot to say on this topic. So if you would like to reach out and connect with us, we're always happy to share the process, the work, our lessons learned, because that was so valuable for us in talking to other folks. So, we appreciate the time and the space today.
Thank you both so much. This was such a fruitful and rich conversation. You shared so many nuggets, and we are just happy that we got to hear from you for a little bit. And so just as we close out, for those of you who are interested, we do have a case study that was published on Baltimore City's adoption process. And so you can access it through the resources page of our website, and definitely encourage you all to check it out. And then just as we close out, to continue the conversation, Ed Reports as an organization, we support states and districts in a variety of ways, including building awareness by deepening understanding of the instructional materials landscape, why they matter, the connections to equity and things like that. Also signaling quality. So we do work to help to develop and deliver resources that signal quality in instructional materials. Conducting high quality local reviews is another area where we can support states and districts in doing the local reviews, creating the criteria, and then also training reviewers, and then also just supporting smart adoption processes. So providing just that critical support and expertise to those who are looking for that throughout the adoption process. So to learn more, you can reach out to our team to learn more. My email address is also posted. So just thank you all for just taking the time today. Again, another just super thank you to Janice and Samantha for taking the time to speak with us today. And again, this webinar will be recorded, so you should be receiving it in a couple of days. So thank you.